Connecticut is known for a lot of wonderful attractions, especially if you're into the paranormal. Very close to Easton and the Union Cemetery, Stepney Cemetery as well. The Warrens, Lorraine Warren, makes her residence in Monroe, and one of the more interesting attractions in terms of local legends is that of Hannah Cranna, which is what brings us to Gregory Four Corners burial ground here, and just on the border between Trumbull and Monroe. So let's scan back here. This is the cemetery here. It is a rather small one. I haven't counted the number of stones, but they're less than 100. There's probably even on the order of 50 stones here. And they're in a state of considerable wear and weathering. Inscriptions that are readable, maybe only a dozen or so, maybe perhaps less than that. It appears to at least one prominent family buried here is the French family, who were around the 1900s or so. There are some beautiful. This is probably the most beautiful stone. It's got the death's head you see at the top. This is Mr. Thomas Curtis, who died in, it's hard to read the date here, April 9th, 1761 is when he died. The lichen is growing on this. But each of these stones has a kind of a footstone that goes along with the headstone here. And so you can see that they're in nicely spaced rows here. It leads me to believe there's been some work done on this cemetery, in the sense that over time, graves shift and move relative to one another with softening of the ground. So why do we come here? Okay, well, this is one of the best local legends. In fact, if you go to Monroe's history website, the National Historical Society website for Monroe, you will see a quite interesting page on this individual, Hannah Cranna, who's the wife of Captain Joseph Hovey. So actually her name was Hannah Hovey, or Goody Hovey, as she would have been known at the time. She was born in the late 18th century. She died, you can see, 1859, 1860. That just indicates that she died over the winter, and record keeping wasn't very strict if you died over the winter. This particular graveyard doesn't have a keep, so the body would have been kept on ice for a portion of the time. You can see that people have come, they've left coins and a little ceramic religious artifact there. Okay, so what's so interesting about Hannah Cranna? Why was she called Hannah Cranna? Well, she is Monroe's most famous witch. She was a wife. Apparently at some point before her death, her husband had died, left her a spinster. And we don't know much about Captain James Hovey. That will be a subject of investigation later. She actually lived on the road that we just came down, Cutler's Farm Road. She lived on what's known as Cragley Hill, which was in the Cutler's Farm section of Monroe. She had a house up on the hill. Being poor and her husband passing away, left her spinster, and because of where she lived, she no longer was known as Hannah Cranna. Being from Cragley Hill, she was affectionately known as Hannah Cranna, and that's what's on this tombstone here. Now, she quickly became a local nuisance in that she claimed to be a witch. In fact, the people who lived in Monroe at that time were very afraid of her. In fact, she exploited this notion of her being a witch to her fullest. Being poor, she would rely on her neighbors for firewood and food, and she would threaten to put curses on people if they didn't give her what she wanted. So she really used this reputation to her advantage. A couple of incidents. She was known to have a number of weird things. Along Cutler's Farm Road there was a rock apparently, and Hannah Cranna would sit upon the rock and just stare at the oncoming traffic. Now this is the road we drove in on. Sit and stare and talk to people who would pass by. Villagers thought that she sat there with the devil, conversing with him. In fact, it's alleged that upon this rock, the hoof prints of the devil would stand. She would travel around the town looking for supplies. In fact, firewood and food were the main form of commodity that she would seek in exchange for protection against herself. The town was so afraid of her, they actually, a group of people actually got together and sought prosecution for Hannah Cranna. I'm going to pan around the graveyard as I complete the story. For her dabblings in witchcraft and the occult, which she didn't deny. Turns out she was never prosecuted for these things. So she never stood trial. She never was convicted. And as a result, she was able to live a really long life. A number of incidences that make her really kind of strange person. The sitting on the rock and staring out along the road is one rather interesting. Her house, and this is where superstition came in, her house was allegedly guarded by snakes of all different sizes. Snake, of course, was symbolized the devil, and even the trees here have kind of serpentine arms, as you can see here, perhaps protecting her. But that made a lot of people stay away. Her familiar was old Boreas. It was a pet rooster, and what's interesting about this rooster was that allegedly it crowed at the witching hour, which is about 3 in the morning, the most unholy time of the day, as if you are a Warrenologist, they will attest to. In fact, this rooster was so punctual that townspeople would actually set their watches by the cackling of old Boreas. In fact, when old Boreas passed away, he was buried in the corner of her garden, and that's when allegedly Hannah Cranna told a confidant that her time was coming, her time was at an end as well. During her life, she really sought trouble. Not in terms of just gaining material device, but she tended to pick fights with people. I should say fights, she should pick encounters with people. A number of incidences have been put on record. Whether or not they're true or not is completely, up to the reader or the viewer to decide. She had a stream on her property, her house upon the hill, or rather meager dwellings. Fisherman went in one day to catch a fish. She cursed him, and of course he was unable to catch a fish that day. So rather modest curse. If you're going to get cursed by a witch, I definitely would not have a problem with that one. Reminds me of Seventh-day Baptist in some ways. This tree with the long reaching branches here. Second incident, she went past a baker and she asked for a free pie. Hannah Cranna was quite the bracketeer. When the baker gave her one of the smaller pies, she said, "Why don't you give me one of the larger ones?" And then proceeded to issue a somewhat mild threat after that. When the baker refused, she decided that she would issue a curse on the poor baker. She called her a selfish woman, and laid on a curse that she would never have luck with her pies again. Again, a rather modest curse, respectively speaking, and allegedly that became true. At some point during the later stages of her life, there was a drought which overtook the town, and farmers actually knew her reputation so well that they asked for her help in ending the drought so she could bring rain. And Goody Hovey, or Hannah Cranna, said, "If you have faith in Hannah, by sundown your wish shall be granted." And following day, allegedly, sure enough, wind and rain came streaming down. This is one of the rocks here in Four Corners here. If you believe in the devil's prints here, it looks like kind of a misshapen cloven mark here. Perhaps the devil has been keeping watch on Miss Cranna if you are superstitious. But again, you can see the indentation there in the rock. If I shadow can get out of the way, thank you. A number of bizarre rocks here and random rocks in the cemetery here. There's a classic incident with two oxmen who came by, passing by her home, kind of chided her along, asked for some of her power to move the oxen cart. He said, before you pass yonder tree, your wish shall be granted. And she cackled, classic witch cackling. And the men laughed, they passed, and suddenly their cart was immovable. And not only immovable, but the wheels fell off and the oxen ran off into the woods, and they spent days chasing them down. So she was quite, I should say, the Hellraiser. During this time period, you have to understand, women, especially women who were spinstered, didn't have many options in terms of finding income, Now this is a very strange stone. I just noticed that. Look at that. There's a bunch of scratch marks in it. That serves a picture. So spinstered women were often looked at as being rather odd outside of society. You can read about the legend of Dogtown, a whole town full of women who were widowed after the war, right after the Revolution, and as a result of that, the town was abandoned except for these women who couldn't go anywhere, and they literally became known as witches. It seems though that Goody Hovey was very much somebody who was very liberated in the sense that there's nothing she could do about her reputation, so she just embraced it and used it to get by. Upon her death, she had specific instructions that she wanted her body to be carried from her house to the grave site here. And she actually died during a rather brutal snowstorm, and they allegedly decided to take it by wagon. And the casket kept falling off the wagon. In fact, even when they chained it up, it would slide off and not stay on. So they had to carry her very slowly by hand. And I will say this, in terms of these legends, this stone looks about as new as any in the cemetery. One of the stories behind her after her death is that because of the placement of the cemetery here, you can see it's just around this turn, that her ghost appears out in the middle of the road, causes cars to careen out of control and to hit her stone so that it has to continuously be replaced. Either they're talking about this turn here, or perhaps the turn in the opposite direction, because that would be the one I think would be more likely. But she sits on a riser here, and you can see that it's like on the edge of a... It's just embedded. I wouldn't be surprised if this had been moved at some point. It seems to be embedded in almost concrete. And the condition of the stone doesn't indicate to me that this is something that is as old as what we're seeing here, these weather-beaten stones. It's not even the same material. I mean, we can find a number of individuals who died at about the same time, and this is easily the best manicured and stone in the cemetery, and that rather interesting foundation of it. So perhaps there's some truth that it was hit and had to be replaced. That's entirely possible, although this hill here would seem to cut against that. In the Warren Occult Museum, there is a rather Halloweenish, cartoonish caricature of Hannah Cranna as a atypical witch, your prototypical witch, your archetypical witch. Black hat, warts, green skin. But I have to say that more likely we're looking at an individual who was an outcast on society and who felt that she would play that role and utilize the fact that people were afraid of her to basically survive. And you can't fault somebody for being in a tough situation. It's a rather gnarly piece of wood there. This one actually looks like a little bit of a face. So this is the resting place of Hannah Cranna. Again, go to the Historical Society of Monroe, Connecticut. Excellent write-up about her background. The town does not shy away at all from her story, and we're very proud to have visited and gotten the true story, or at least laid out the legend and just made some suspicions about the past. So this is DevilsHopyard coming at you from Gregory Four Corners Burial Ground here in the border of Trumbull and Monroe, Connecticut.